My name's Jacob Kalina. I'm with UGA Extension, A&R agent in Lowndes County. Thanks for joining us. I will be the moderator for this session, and I'd like to thank Meister Media for sponsoring the 2025 Blueberry Educational Session. I am going to introduce our first speaker, and that's Dr. Juliet Chu, and she will be talking about expanding the genetic base of blueberry breeding through interspecific hybridization.
Good morning, everyone, and I appreciate your coming out in this cold weather, Saturday morning, first thing. And I would like to introduce you the research we have done for the past 2 years that will facilitate the advancement of blueberry breeding in Georgia breeding program. So blueberry is in the family of Ericaceae and in the genus of Vaccinium, section Cyanococcus. So in this particular section, there are 9 diploid species and 12 tetraploid species and 3 hexaploids. So blueberry has a very broad genetic base and across different chromosome levels. And so for the cultivated blueberries that are actually being cultured all over the world, there are 2 major species that are 2-ploid level being cultivated widely. One is tetraploid that has 48 chromosomes, and the other one is hexaploid. So in the tetraploid pool for cultivated blueberry, there are 3, can be classified into 3 categories based off on their geographic, their chilling requirement and then geographic distribution. So there's a northern high bush, southern high bush, and low bush. So these classifications are pretty much based off on their adaptability and then their chilling requirement. Chilling requirement is like when the blueberry going to the winter dormancy and then coming out, how many hours needed between like 0 to 7 degrees Celsius is needed to form more of a uniform and a regular leaf out and blooming. So that's a chilling requirement. So for southern high bush, normally people would consider between like 0 to 600 chilling hours is considered southern. And northern high bush would be way above, like from 600 hours to more than 1,000 hours needed. So it's like in the northern state, like cooler, much colder zones to grow. And there's also low bush. Low bush also distributed in the northern regions and requires much longer chilling hour to wake up from the winter dormancy. And the low bush mainly distributed in Canada and Europe. So for southern high bush that I highlighted here is being widely grown here in the southeast region of the United States. And southern high bush has introgression from the wild diploid species from this region like the Vaccinium darrowi and Vaccinium fasciatum. So southern high bush being like it's a interspecific hybridization between northern high bush and those low diploid species I mentioned. And then the southern high bush has early ripening and a smooth texture and also carry large berries. And another species widely grown in the southeast region is rabbit eye. The rabbit eye is indigenous to southeast of the United States. And it has 6 sets of chromosomes. So Georgia definitely has it, and these, because it's local, they're extremely vigorous and have longevity, like their soil adaptability is exceptional, and have great productivity, tolerant to heat, and low maintenance. However, the fruit quality many times has been shown not to be as good, or the fruit size could be small, and some of the fruit produced recently have fruit rot issue after harvesting. So blueberry production in Georgia has huge economic impact. This is information taken in 2022 by UGA, and it shows the top 10 Georgia commodities, and the blueberry was ranked among the top 10. In 2021, blueberry bring in more than $300 million of economic impact to this state. So it is a very important commodity. So talking a little bit about UGA blueberry breeding history. well, in general. So rabbit eye and the southern highbush were actually developed in the southeast. The main breeding program at this time would be Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi, and NC State also have a major breeding program. So rabbit eye breeding started back in 1920s among the collaborative efforts from the university and USDA. So up to the late 1980 releases, the genetic basis of blueberry were very narrow. They were actually limited to 4 wild races, that wild selections made in the beginning. And even when I look through all the UGA rabbit eye, we are still actively breeding for rabbit eye. And the UGA rabbit eye breeding program restricted to actually limited 9 original wild selections. So it's very narrow. However, the breeding program can last, like breeding so many years is because there's a lot of a tremendous amount of heterozygosity in the genome of rabbit eye. So the breeders can still select even though it's limited from the beginning source. Now, southern highbush breeding started in 1948, led by Dr. Sharp and then Dr. Darrell. That actually, like I said, they breed the diploid species with northern highbush to introduce the heat tolerance and the soil adaptability to northern highbush, becoming interspecific. It's called southern highbush. And UGA started to engage in southern highbush breeding in 1970s. So here's an overview of the breeding lines in UGA. So UGA, since the breeding program started to select the very first selection back in 1950s, like our selection 1, and so far we've already made more than 4,000 selections in our program. So the distribution of the current existing selections is like we have 61% that are southern highbush, and we have about 31% that are rabbit eye. These are for commercial production. So UGA also have a small section of selections that are actually dedicated to ornamentals. So those are actually not breed for commercial production, but they have features that would be either for landscape or homeowner interest. So their architecture-wise or flowering type and then the fruit characteristics are actually quite appealing. But they're not for commercial. They occupy a small percent, about 8% selection are for that purpose. Among the 8, they're either rabbit eye or southern highbush. So UGA with, like actually this year, since our first breeder was hired, Dr. Brightwell was hired, this year is the 80th anniversary of UGA breeding program. And so for that 80 years of breeding history, UGA released 16 rabbit eye varieties and 35 southern highbush. The popular cultivar from UGA breeding program still grown in the southeast regions, including, like it's not thorough, but like Brightwell, Climax, Accruer, Rebel, Suzy Blue, and Georgia Dawn. These are a few that are popular in our region. So here I'm going to talk about some recent challenges that Georgia blueberry industry are facing or has become a prominent problem. Is spring freeze damages. We have encountered several in the past few years, and every year, of course, at this time, everybody in this business would be antsy to know if this cold front would affect blueberry after it's starting to bloom. So it's like a dip of freeze after the flower already been initiated. So it's spring freeze is a big issue. And fruit quality issue, like I mentioned earlier, with some of the rabbit eye harvest from blueberry farms, they would just, have a tremendous amount of issues, and then the ones with fruit quality issue would have to be discarded. So it's a very main problem. And also Georgia, because of the cultivar selection right now, the distribution of cultivar is actually just among a few. Therefore, the harvest window become much more concentrated in our area. Therefore, expanding the harvest window would help to mitigate the price crash when everybody produce blueberry at a similar time. So narrow harvest time window would be a problem. And another big issue is anthracnose fruit rot, and also become an issue for us. And yield loss to gall midget and bud mites. These are some main challenges our region currently facing. And therefore, we, as a breeding program, we would like to broaden the genetic base of current breeding material and through interspecific hybridization and integrating native wild species. And we are hoping to improve the resilience and longevity of blueberry production in our region to address some of these issues through improving and broadening the genetic base. So this is one of the species that we're trying to look into, integrate. This is a local, and this species is called Vaccinia elliottii. It's a diploid species, and this species actually had been used by Florida program years ago through the leadership of Dr. Paula Rain. And so this particular species, as you can see, I put a picture, this is how the bush look like when it's blooming. And this is flowers is very small compared to southern high bush and carries small, tiny fruits. However, this little bitty, even though it's carry little bitty fruits, these fruits are very fragrant. It's actually, so one thing about blueberry industry, I went to the international Vaccinia meeting hosted in Canada, and one of the major message that I got from that meeting is that actually, as a blueberry industry as a whole, would like to push forward with the blueberry market by retaining the quality of blueberry. So one thing about quality is not, like flavor. Can we retain or improve the flavor to make blueberry high quality, high premium product all the time? It's not like to push for quantity, it's push for quality. So I think this Vaccinia elliottii have a specific fragrance that actually could improve the fruit quality of blueberries. And also because, as you can see, this is, nobody look after it, right? It's going very well. And we as growers would know how much we have input in order to have any fruits on our berries. So improving the local adaptability through this interspecific is also another objective. With that in mind, we already made crosses between the southern high bush cultivar, which is, as I said, tetraploid, has 4 sets of chromosomes, with elliottii, has 2 sets of chromosomes. So this is an image of a tetraploid seedling. It's a very low success rate, okay? It's like made hundreds of crosses, only get 2 or 3 seedlings out of that. But then we were able to identify the ploid level of this tetraploid using the flow cytometry. So it's very easy to understand. So here we have the diploid control. This is where the nuclei signal coming out from there. And this is triploid. You can see how close they are. It's actually based on the distance of this, of where the nuclei would produce a signal to determine the ploid level. So this is tetraploid further from 2x. So we know that this is a 3x. So we have several triploid species already introduced. Now, when I say, okay, made it, but not making it now because triploids, because of the odd chromosome level, the next thing is when they actually producing the pollen, they wouldn't produce pollen. They wouldn't produce a viable ovary either. So it's called a strong triploid block, which means these guys are not fertile. So how can we overcome infertility from triploids? Because now we marry the wild genes, but we cannot move on to the next generation because they're infertile. So what should we do? So the next thing we did was to overcome the chromosome, this triploid block by chromosome doubling through tissue culture. So we put these, our blueberries, the segments into the tissue culture and let them grow out like that, and then we treated them with colchicine. So as a pilot study, we were able to induce Rebel and Emerald. Rebel and Emerald are 2 southern high bush cultivars. And this is a gift from Dr. Jonathan Oliver that he received these guys in tissue culture and is shared with us from Fall Creek. And then we continue to culture them, and we were actually using this method I mentioned earlier to induce the ploid level of Rebel and Emerald to, this is like the tetraploid, how it look like, and this is octoploid Rebel, how they look like. And this is a tetraploid, the regular emerald from tissue culture, and this is a synthetic octoploid. So again, we're using the flow cytometry to precisely determine the ploid level, and we know for sure these guys are octoploids. So we have a mature protocol established to induce these guys. Another species we work with is Vascatum. So this is the first diploids we are trying to induce. And it's very robust in tissue culture, and this is crazy when they produce that many shoots from one small segment. So we use this method I used earlier. So we again using, so this is a diploid species, and this is a we are now using the hexaploid. It's a lot of fun with blueberries, so many ploid levels. We use hexaploid as control, and we know this fuscatum is becoming tetraploid. So quickly, the doubling effect actually shows a giga effect. When you double the chromosome, some of the traits of the plants becoming more prominent. So here, you can see the synthetic 8X have significantly larger stem size, and also the 4X compared to 2X also have thicker stem. This is in conform with known literature. And beyond that, working with triploids and diploids, we also directly crossed the southern high bush and rabbit and created a pentaploid population. Now, these guys are not as bad as tetraploids, okay, as triploids. They will have, they're forgiving when they become pentaploids, higher level. So some of them would be fertile. So my students would engage in this. We've already put them into the field, and we'll study their fertility and to use them to further breeding. So now these guys, the pentaploids, already have genes from rabbit eye and southern high bush. So lastly, I would like to introduce you this Neesmith Professorship in Blueberry Breeding Program. So UGA established this endowment professorship in honor of Dr. Neesmith, my predecessor, the breeder, for his 30 years of distinguished service and producing those blueberry cultivars. So I'm hoping that you guys will be interested in supporting our program. So if you would like to donate to this endowment professorship, they will help us to provide funding for blueberry breeding and cultivar development and student training. These funds will be managed very wisely to perpetuate this investment. So we would appreciate you if you're interested in supporting by scan this link. So lastly, I would like to acknowledge the people who dedicated to this work. So my student, Emily Water, she worked on the tissue culture work and all those protein induction experiments. And Cindera is a girl is going to work on the pentaploid population. And Tracy, my technician, is making everything happen in the blueberry breeding program. We also appreciate the funding from UGARF, UGA Cultivar Development Program, Innovative Gateway, and Georgia Blueberry Commission, and also our collaborator, Dr. Paul Laring and Shilling. I don't know if you have time for a question. Thank you.
Any questions? All right, thank y'all. Thank you. With that, our next speaker is going to be Dr. Jonathan Oliver, and he is going to give us a pathology update.
So yes, I am Jonathan Oliver. I'm the fruit pathologist and extension specialist at the University of Georgia, based in Tifton. And for today's pathology update, I'm going to briefly talk at the beginning about the diseases that were diagnosed on blueberry in Georgia during the 2024 growing season. And then I will briefly talk about and give a management update for Phytophthora root rot, mummyberry, fruit rots, leaf spots, and I'll end by talking about changes or thoughts about the seasonal spray schedule. So first, what were those disease issues that were most frequently diagnosed by the Plant Disease Clinic in Tifton in 2024? As it's been the case for the last several years running, actually I think every year I've been here, Phytophthora cinnamomi, which causes root rot, has been the most frequently diagnosed issue on blueberry in Georgia. We also see and saw several stem blight or stem disease issues, including Botrytis stem blight and Phomopsis, which both continue to be problems on blueberry. We also saw anthracnose fruit rot and leaf rust as well. And I think this is the second or third year in a row that anthracnose, leaf rust, and Phytophthora cinnamomi have been some of our top issues. So let's talk about Phytophthora root rot, since it is a frequently diagnosed issue in Georgia, affecting really almost all of the locations where we grow blueberries to some extent. Let's talk about management of that. So Phytophthora root rot is caused by Phytophthora cinnamomi. This pathogen produces swimming spores or zoospores, which spread very easily through the water. And so you often see this disease first in poorly drained or more low-lying areas of the field. And it causes damage to roots, which lead to stunted growth and leaf discoloration. So you can see affected plants have much smaller root balls. Plants that are several years old that you shouldn't be able to do this, but if you go out to the field and they have Phytophthora root rot, sometimes with just one hand you can grab those plants and pull them right out of the ground because the roots are damaged by this disease. Cultural practices are critical for control of root rot, since it's generally a problem of low or poorly drained, excessively moist sites. So before planting, at first in selecting the site in the first place, and then also in bedding up the plants, it's important to ensure adequate drainage prior to planting, because once those plants are in the ground, there's not much that can be done to rectify poor drainage. Another thing we see culturally that exacerbates problems with Phytophthora root rot is excessive irrigation. And you can see in this case, this is the drip line next to these young blueberry plants. And you can see the excessive amount of moss growth present in this field. It was several inches thick of moss growing all around the drip line, indicating that this was an excessively wet location, at least as a result of the drip irrigation. And not surprisingly, I was called out to this field because the grower was having problems with something that turned out to be Phytophthora root rot. So chemical controls for Phytophthora are also critical for management. However, they're not going to be effective for reversing severe root rot damage on plants. So those plants that are having major issues with Phytophthora are not going to be saved by applications of these chemicals. However, other plants in the same field that are not necessarily at that advanced stage of disease may benefit from applications of effective chemistries. So the materials that we can apply for Phytophthora root rot management include the phosphonates like Prophyte, K-Phyte, and Alliette, mefanoxam, which is found in both Ridamil gold and in Arondis gold, and oxythiopiprolin, which is found in Arondis gold 200 and Arondis gold. And Arondis, or oxythiopiprolin, is a relatively new product that's available for use in blueberries. I think we've included it in our recommendations for just the past 2 or 3 years. And so I want to talk specifically about some of the details with those products today. But the products for Phytophthora control can either be applied in a foliar manner, and that includes all of these phosphonate fungicides, or they can be applied through the drip. And so in that case, K-Phyte, one of the phosphonates, as well as Ridamil, Arondis gold, and Arondis gold 200 can be applied in that manner. So some notes regarding the phosphonates. Prophyte, K-Phyte, and Alliette can be applied to leaves for management of Phytophthora root rot, and then they have systemic activity, and that's why it's effective against this pathogen that primarily interacts with the roots. These foliar applications should be made after leaf emergence. I get questions every spring on when growers can start applying phosphonates for Phytophthora root rot control. Until those leaves are expanded and able to and are active, you won't get the proper uptake of the chemical, and you can also, if they're real young leaves, get some damage as well. So they need to be fully expanded, active leaves, not just leaves that have hung out from last season and the plants are still dormant. That won't work either. So plant injury can occur if these products are applied to plants that are heat or water stressed, and we've certainly seen that when some of these materials are applied kind of in the midday heat. You can get some leaf burn. If they're applied in acidic water or with acidifying agents, and you can check the labels for these products to look at the requirements as far as the pH, but they can cause phytotoxicity if the acidifying agents are present. And in tank mixes, if they're mixed with copper or foliar fertilizers, there can be some interactions also. And so check the labels whenever you're using these products to make sure you're using them in a manner accordance with the label. So for the products that can be applied through the drip, K-Phyte, Ridamil, Arondis gold, and Arondis gold 200, I wanted to note some things from the labels regarding the application timing, because I always get a question of when these can be applied as well early in the year. So the labels for Ridamil gold and Arondis gold and Arondis gold 200 all have language that indicates these can be applied before plants start to grow in the spring. And so generally plants, blueberries, begin to flush roots just before they begin to grow and bloom. And so really that time period is when these can be applied for the first time. And then most of these can be applied an additional time, and the language on the label is a little unclear as to when that should be done, but it should be done in a period coinciding with favorable root rot development. And so that can probably vary depending on what the weather conditions have been. But oftentimes, after hedging, sometime after that, when the plants are actively growing again after harvest, may be a time for applications of these materials. The label for Arondis Gold and 200 and Arondis Gold, respectively, says the second application must be made a minimum or at least 7 to 30 days after the first application. The label for K-Phyte simply says do not apply to plants that are dormant. And so if the plants are still dormant, K-Phyte applications should not be made. Other notes from these labels: it's important for Ridamil, Arondis, and Arondis Gold that the product be moved into the root zone of the plant. And rainfall will move the fungicide into the root zone, but if there's not rainfall, irrigation, the Ridamil label says a half inch to an inch of water can help move that material down into the root zone. And a similar language is present on the Arondis Gold and Arondis Gold 200 label. So those products need to be moved down into the root zone. Another thing that I saw this past year in some research done out in California suggests that because the active ingredient in Arondis, oxythiopiprolin, binds so tightly to dry soil that you can actually get more efficacy out of using Arondis if you apply it to soil that's already a little bit wet. And so if they pre-wetted their soil before they put out their Arondis, or they put out the Arondis at the tail end of their irrigation cycle, they had much better efficacy against Phytophthora in some other fruit crops, and I'm sure the same would be true in blueberry. So make note of that as well. For K-Phyte, it's already applied in at least 20 gallons of water, and the label says avoid further irrigation for 24 to 48 hours after treatment has been completed. I'm not sure what the label is getting to there exactly, but I do know that it is possible if we have excessive rain after you put out these products, or you excessively irrigate after they're put out, you could actually move it all the way through the root zone and out of the root zone, and then these materials would not be effective anymore either. So we also we're curious in looking at whether we had any Phytophthora populations that were developing resistance to some of these fungicides. And so over the last 5 years, we've collected isolates of Phytophthora cinnamomi from South Georgia, and a collaborator of ours, Bill Klein, collected isolates from North Carolina this past growing season. And so we conducted some work with one of my students looking at 35 Georgia isolates and 25 North Carolina isolates of Phytophthora cinnamomi to determine how sensitive these isolates were to these different fungicides. And so we did a mycelial growth inhibition assay to basically assess how much fungicide is necessary to reduce the growth of the pathogen. And this is a pretty standard protocol. But it had not been done, to our knowledge, on Phytophthora from blueberry, especially Phytophthora from blueberry in the southeast previously. So mefenoxam, Ridamil, has been used for a good bit of time on blueberries in the southeast, and so we were concerned that resistance may be present, but based on our data, all of our isolates we tested were very sensitive to these different fungicides. So that's good news. There doesn't seem to be resistance amongst Phytophoras in Georgia and North Carolina, at least the isolates we tested, to these different fungicides. Oxythiopiprolin, it was particularly timely to do this research this year because, again, growers really haven't had much experience with this product. They haven't put it out. Most of these Phytophoras have probably never been exposed to it, and they should be about as sensitive as they can be right now to this material. And in fact, they were extremely sensitive. Less than 1 part per billion of oxythiopiprolin was effective at reducing the growth of Phytophthora cinnamomi. And this will be important baseline information going forward, so we can always go back to the information we got this year in the future after many years of potential use of these products and compare to see if our isolates are becoming more resistant to these materials. So this will be a good resistance monitoring data. Isolates are generally less sensitive on average to phosphorus acid, the active ingredient in the phosphonate fungicides, but of course we're applying those at much higher concentrations, and so it all kind of works itself out. Did see a few isolates that were relatively less sensitive to phosphorus acid in Georgia relative to the North Carolina isolates, but they all were definitely in the range of being sensitive, and so no major concerns at this point for resistance to any of these materials. So mummyberry is another important disease that affects blueberries, and we did a trial this past season, and I want to talk about those results. But first, as you may or may not know, mummyberry is one of the most important diseases of blueberries wherever they are grown. The symptoms include these shoot blights and eventual infection internally of the fruit with the fungus leads to fruit mummification. So it leaves behind, the fungus sucks all the water more or less out and leaves behind these dried husks of the fruit. On Georgia rabbit mummyberry is a major issue. On southern high bush, it's not as big of an issue, at least in the southern part of the state where most blueberries are grown, because southern high bush blueberries escape this disease due to breaking bud and blooming earlier. And the reason for that is if we look at the disease cycle of mummyberry, the spores that are produced on these cup mushrooms that emerge in the spring from these mummies primarily go to the brand new growth. And the chill hour requirements for the mummyberry fungus to know when to produce these spores are essentially the same as whatever the native population of blueberries are in that area. And since the rabbit blueberries are the native blueberry type that we have, and the southern high bush emerging much earlier than that basically allows them to get past the vulnerable stage of infection, and so we don't see a lot of mummyberry in South Georgia. We do see it on southern high bush, other parts of the southeast, including in North Carolina. We just don't see it in South Georgia or Florida. But what happens is these spores infect the new leaves. As those leaves expand, they'll have these brown or gray streaks down the center of them. These are called strikes. And a different spore type of the fungus is produced, which can then infect the blooms through wind, rain, or bee activity. And then those berries that develop from those blooms will be infected internally with this fungus. And you won't see any signs initially, but as those berries progress towards ripeness, some of them will shrivel up and turn tan or pink and become mummies that will fall to the ground, and then the cycle will continue. And there's only one cycle per season of this disease. So if you can remove those mummies from the field, you can reduce the initial infection and reduce problems with mummyberry. And so if you bury those mummies over an inch deep or rake them out of the field, you can get some level of control of mummyberry, but generally this is just not sufficient by itself to control mummyberry. Chemical controls are very effective. Applications to protect vulnerable tissues from green tip through bloom are most effective for management of mummyberry. And things like pristine and the DMI fungicides like Indar, Quash, Tilt, Bumper, etc. are recommended for mummyberry control. Whenever DMI fungicides are applied around bloom, we recommend tank mixes with a product like a multi-site fungicide like Captan. Some of the DMIs, especially Indar specifically, has been shown to increase problems with ripe rot if it's applied around bloom, not in tank mix with Captan. So the DMI fungicides remain effective for mummyberry control based on our trial work this past season. You can see we made 4 applications, a green tip, 20% bloom through late bloom of materials, and all of the DMI fungicides included here, which are Indar, Proline. Propulse also includes the same DMI fungicide that is in Proline, and Lunaflex, which includes difenconazole. All of these materials were very effective at reducing the relative amount of disease in this trial relative to the untreated control. This work was done up in Toccoa on rabbit eye. So moving on to fruit rots, I've talked about some fungicide resistance findings over the last couple years, as well as at multiple county meetings this past year in Georgia. So I won't spend quite as much time today talking about fungicide resistance, but since it impacts the spray program, I did want to go through our findings there. In short, we have a lot of different fruit rots that impact blueberry production. 3 of the major ones are anthracnose rot, alternaria rot, and botrytis gray mold, or blossom blight. And all of these are pathogens that can infect the plant around bloom or affect fruit all the way up until harvest. Often these organisms will remain latent within that developing fruit until that fruit ripens, the sugar levels rise, the fungal organism wakes up and begins to reproduce and shrivel those berries. So control of these different rots typically involves fungicide applications from bloom through harvest. There's several different fungicides which are recommended in the Southeast Regional IPM Guide for management of these different rots. But unfortunately, the organisms that cause these rots are well known to develop resistance to our fungicides. So I would like to point out a couple of fungicides, Xyram and Captan, which are multi-site fungicides which have some level of activity against all of these rots. These can be important resistance management tools, and I'll talk about that later. But we have seen resistance. We first saw resistance in anthracnose to both of the components of the fungicide Pristine near Blackshear, and this was causing control failures for a grower who was using Pristine and Abound in their spray program to manage rots, as had been done in Georgia for years, very effectively, but in this case, the resistance led to control failures. We did fungicide resistance screening using a mycelial growth inhibition assay, where we looked at what concentration of fungicides would inhibit these isolates from growing. And so you can see two different isolates growing here, one on the top row. You can see that it's inhibited by a high concentration of fungicide here at the right, and whereas this isolate down below grew just as well at the high concentration and had become resistant. So to summarize briefly, for the Alternaria botrytis and Colletotricum isolates we looked at, there I have this chart. These are the different active ingredients we used to screen Alternaria botrytis and Colletotricum isolates respectively. We did see resistance in the Alternaria to both components in the fungicide Pristine, at least in some percentage of our isolates. In the case of Pristine, we saw some resistant Colletotricum isolates as well as some isolates with moderate resistance to this fungicide amongst the botrytis isolates we screened. Of concern also, fludioxonil is an active ingredient found in both switch and Moravis prime. And we did find a percentage of isolates within our testing that were resistant to fludioxonil. And this is especially problematic because the other ingredient in switch and Moravis prime, the Colletotricum isolates are naturally resistant to those ingredients. So fludioxonil is the active ingredient that was kind of doing all the work for us with switch and Moravis prime. And if resistance accumulates in fields to a high enough level, if a high enough percentage of isolates become resistant, we may also see control failures with those materials, though we have not noted those to this point. So to ensure that fungicides remain effective against fruit rots, it's more essential now more than ever to utilize good fungicide resistance management practices. It's important to rotate the available modes of action, and also so you're not hitting the organisms with the same types of materials over and over. You have to throw them a curveball every so often. And then also tank mix with multi-site fungicides. So like Captan and Zyram, these are far less likely to lead to resistance development. And if you tank mix these single-site fungicides with these multi-site fungicides, you can dramatically reduce the chances that you're going to be selecting for resistance as rapidly. We saw no resistance. I didn't note it on the last slide, but we saw no resistance in our populations of fruit rot pathogens to fluazinam, the active ingredient in Omega. And so for the last couple years, I've been recommending Omega as potentially a good rotation option. It's likely best utilized around petal fall because it has a 30-day pre-harvest interval. Another fungicide which all of our isolates of Colletotricum and Alternaria were sensitive to was quash. This is a DMI fungicide. Usually the DMIs aren't thought of as being so great against rots, but quash is definitely an exception from our trial work. Seems to be effective against fruit rots. And usually DMIs are used for mummyberry, like I mentioned, or control of things like rust. So if you're using it at bloom for mummyberry control or after bloom for rust control, know that it's probably also helping control these rots, and it may be therefore a good rotation option in your rot management program. All right, I'm going to talk about leaf spots very briefly. Leaf spot diseases like septoria leaf spot and leaf rust can be significant because they can lead to premature defoliation of the plants and reduce return yield next year. And they can be controlled through chemical means by applications made from early cover sprays, so basically after petal fall through the end of the season. There are several different chemicals which are effective against the leaf spots. I'd like to note a couple things from this chart. Prophyte and K-phyte, these phosphonates, which are also useful for management of Phytophthora, have very good efficacy against septoria and anthracnose leaf spots, but they're not effective necessarily against rust. Bravo, a multi-site fungicide, has is pretty well effective against all three of these leaf spot pathogens. And of course, the DMIs are very effective for leaf rust and also septoria leaf spot as well. So we did some trial work these past 2 seasons at the Blueberry Research Farm, looking at some labeled and some unlabeled materials for their activity. What we saw is that we had relatively less disease, or significantly less disease, relative to the untreated control when we used products such as Sevia, which is a DMI fungicide, and Alesis, which also includes a DMI in a combo product. We saw Bravo Weatherstick did very well, and among the organic OMRI-listed materials we tested, Howler Evo did the best and did reduce blueberry leaf rust issues significantly. In 2024, with some of these materials, we saw the same result. All of the materials we tested reduced Septoria leaf spot, which we had more of this year than we did in 2023, as well as blueberry leaf rust. And so Teceris is another new product that is not yet labeled for use on blueberry, but it does seem to be effective. We also attempted to use Coside, which is a copper material, OMRI-listed copper material that is used for algal leaf spot or algal stem blotch control in blueberries. It also seems to have at least some activity against these leaf spots as well. At least it did this year in our trial work. But note that Alesis and Teceris are not yet labeled for use in blueberry. Alesis, I think, got labeled this year for the first time for use in grapes and maybe a couple other crops. And we know that BASF is pursuing a label for use in other berries. So hopefully a label will be coming soon because it seems to be an effective product based on our testing. We also tested, that was farthing data. We also tested on Suzy Blue. We had lower amounts of disease, but we still saw essentially the same trend with these different fungicides. And we applied these fungicides, by the way, starting right after hedging all the way through mid-September on a biweekly basis. And one other trial we did this year with material that's also not yet labeled for blueberry, flutriafol, we applied it either through the drip or in a foliar manner. And we did see some activity against leaf spots, mostly rust, when we applied that in a foliar manner. It is a DMI fungicide. It has more systemic activity than most DMIs, and it's currently labeled for use in grape against trunk diseases, among which include things caused by Botrytis feri species, which we also have issues with in blueberry. So going forward, if a label is given for blueberry use, it may be a product that might have multiple uses in blueberry systems. So I'll end with the seasonal spray schedule. So the seasonal spray schedule, this is just an example spray schedule, not endorsing any particular product here. In Georgia, where we have multiple disease issues across the growing season from late dormant through after harvest, it's not uncommon for multiple fungicide applications to be needed during the growing season in conventional production. Some key timings are around bloom, where we're concerned about things like mummyberry, Phomopsis twig blight, fruit rots, and botrytis kind of all at once. By the way, this is color-coded to indicate which of these diseases are being targeted by these particular applications. From bloom through harvest, tank mixes with Captan are likely important. I mentioned a possible rotation with a spray of Omega around petal fall. Botrytis feri can be an issue, especially on wounded plants after hedging. And so Pristine is a product that can be effectively used after hedging events. And then after harvest, I've added for the first time a recommendation to include sprays of Coside in those locations where algal stem blotch is becoming a problem. A lot of this efficacy information can be found in the small fruit guide available through the Southern Region Small Fruit Consortium, and the 2025 version will be up soon. No major pathology changes from 2024 to 2025, though. A lot of this efficacy information is also available through the My IPM app, which is available for free through the App Store or Google Play. And very last, I want to mention one other resource. We have a new website, bluedynamo.org, which has been an initiative of a team put together by Dr. Tim Miles at Michigan State, of which UGA and myself are part of, to basically provide new resources for growers attempting to manage fruit rots, specifically anthracnose and botrytis. And as part of our efforts, we're interested to know what are the major concerns and major practices that you as growers are utilizing to manage these fruit rots in your production. And so we have a survey you can access through this QR code. If you want to take a picture of it with your phone, we would appreciate your input through that survey. It's important that growers not only elsewhere in the country where blueberries are grown, but especially our growers here in the Southeast are represented in our results from this survey, so that we basically are working on and providing you with the right information. And so I'd encourage you to access that survey. Growers who complete the entire survey are eligible for a $20 Amazon gift card, so if you fill it out. So with that, I don't know if I have time for questions, but...
We have a minute for questions.
Okay, are there any questions? Yes.
The mulberry spores need photosynthesis?
What do you mean need photosynthesis?
What stimulates? What keeps the plants alive?
Oh, what makes it sporulate in the spring in the first place, you mean?
Cover it up and that will take it.
It's not really the covering up. It's not they need photosynthesis. You cover it up because they can't push those mushrooms up but so high out of those mummies. So that's why an inch deep of burying it can reduce issues. But if you don't bury it deep enough, they can grow right through that. So that's really what stimulates it. It's not the light blocking. It's just the physical amount of distance they have to grow up from those mummies. Yeah. Thank you.
Leaf spot,
Yeah.
where does that come from? What's the origin?
So there are some wild blueberry species that are definitely present in our forests, and so Septoria can actually, that pathogen can go to multiple crops, but certainly it can come from wild blueberries as well that are growing in the woods. And same thing with leaf rust. Leaf rust, we think, overwinters on leaves that hang on the bushes from year to year. And so our rabbit-eye and our high bush in South Georgia, where it doesn't get super cold, can hang on to their leaves, and so the rust cycles kind of begin based on how many leaves overhang. So if we have a winter where it's not super cold, sometimes we'll have more issues with rust in the spring.
You would not classify that as four
That the leaves are still hanging on the plants?
No, that they got the leaf spot. That's just coming in from the berry, I mean, the bears that have been there, wild bears that have been there.
Yeah, sure, it can absolutely be that. Now, if you don't manage it and you have a huge population within your planting and then some leaves carry over to next year, you'll be more likely to have more issues with it, but certainly it can come in from outside of the field and does, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm a forward grower, some of my acres is on 8-foot centers, and I can't get in there in the spring without knocking a lot of fruit off and spray.
Okay.
If I threw through the overhead, have you ever evaluated the effectiveness of putting out fungicides through your overhead system?
I've got some questions about that in recent years. Some of the fungicides can be used that way and are likely to be effective, although I will say as a disclaimer, one of the sites where we had the worst issues with algal stem blotch was a grower who was trying to apply all of his fungicides through the overhead because, of course, the moisture can exacerbate lots of these diseases. So overhead irrigation can be a risk factor for disease. So that kind of counteracts maybe some of the use of fungicides through the overhead. So that is a little bit of a concern. But no, we haven't done directly any trials looking at overhead use and its effectiveness against these diseases.
All right, I believe that's all the time we have for questions. I'm sure you can find Dr. Oliver if you have any more somewhere around. And with that, our next speaker is going to be Dr. Ash Seal, Management of Economically Important Insect Pests and Blueberries.
Good morning. My name is Ash Sayal. I am blueberry entomologist at University of Georgia. Today I'll give you a quick update on insect pests that cause problems in blueberries. I will include some pests that I hear reports from growers. If you have questions about any other pests not covered in the presentations, feel free to ask questions after the presentation if we have time. Otherwise, just stop me around the meeting. I'll stick around all day today and tomorrow morning. So let's start with this table that shows different insect pests that I get reports from growers that occur at different timings during the year in blueberries and cause economic issues. List starts with the bud mites. And in the table, you see those gray bars that show the timing of activity of those particular pests. So just when you see the name of the pest, just look at corresponding gray bars to get an idea of when they may be active and causing problems in the field. Bud mites, scales, borers are post-harvest issues. Then you get into gall midge, thrips, and leaf hoppers. And then fruit worms as the fruit starts to develop, cranberry and cherry fruit worms. Then plum curculio, blueberry maggot, spotted wing Drosophila, white grubs, ground poles, and now more recently chili thrips have added to the list. They have already started causing problems in Florida and have moved into Georgia in some counties. Let's start with the blueberry bud mites. They are really tiny areophyid mites. They're about 1/128th of an inch in size, really hard to see individually if you haven't seen before. With naked eye, you will need to use hand lens to identify them. Females, they can lay up to 200 eggs, and they can complete development in a relatively short period of time, about 15 days at 19 degrees centigrade. They go through 4 different stages to complete their development. They primarily disperse by air. However, they can disperse by crawling locally from one bud to another, and also by hitchhiking through the equipment or individual personnel working in the field. Populations peak in December through February when they find time within the birds, but the individual populations, small populations, start in the summer post-harvest. That is when the birds that are going to fruit next year, that's when those birds start, and these bud mites get into those buds during the post-harvest time. If you have mild winters, they obviously find an opportunity to grow populations significantly higher and cause a lot more damage. Because they remain inside the buds, they continue to remain and develop their populations and cause a lot of damage. Symptoms include the bushiness of the buds. They also, as they feed, they release some toxin in the buds that leads to development of those pimples and blisters that you see in these pictures here. So at high populations, you can find these very common in those birds that can be easily identified. They can really build high populations and cause a lot of damage. We have seen situations where farmers was not able to harvest the field because damage was so high, fruit set was extremely low. Sampling for bud mites is really easy because they are inside the buds, just collecting, collecting 10 random shoots from a field with 5 buds per shoot. When you have 50 shoots, put them in Ziploc bags, and after a couple hours, the larvae feeding inside the buds will come out in the Ziploc bags. They're really small, tiny larvae I'm sorry, put them in I'm sorry. 10 randomly selected birds with 5 fruiting birds on each shoot, and then examine the scales on the birds. If you have about 10% infestation with those symptoms, you will need to make spray applications. And management for bud mites is relatively easy. This starts with the post-harvest pruning. As I mentioned, that is the time when they start to develop their populations in a field inside the buds. Even though we don't see those peak populations at that time, that is when they start. So heavy pruning in the fields can help in infested fields. And then we have lots of miticide options now developed. As you see, Portal was one of the best ones in trials. Oberon, Acromide, Brigade, and also insecticides like Danitol 7, Abamectin, and Movento can help. One of the best ways to control bud mites is making horticultural or superior oil applications, 2% by volume. And when using oils for bud mites, the best way to do is to use high spray volume and high pressure, because we want to make sure that we get good coverage inside the buds. And also using surfactants with insecticides can help insecticides actually come in contact with the plant tissue and the bud mites inside the plant tissue. Spider mites is another issue generally seen during the post-harvest time. The most important symptom to look for is leaf bronzing when they build up high populations, and the populations generally flare up in fields that have some kind of drought symptoms or have not been irrigated properly. That is the opportunity these mites find to flourish. And just make sure to keep your fields happy and irrigated to minimize the risk of these mites. If you do see leaf bronzing widespread in the field, there are ways to control. Of course, miticides as the Portal, Oberon, or Acromide are among the most effective miticide options. Scales and mealybugs have, especially scales, several species have become more widespread issues in our situations in the Southeast, especially since the introduction of SWD, as more broad-spectrum insecticides have been sprayed. Scale populations have increased, as you see in these pictures. This is, of course, a worst-case scenario, but scales are very sneaky pests. They start populations with just one crawler landing in a bush, and they start to develop populations inside under the bark in a very protected spot. Once they have developed high populations, then they start to spread around the field. It's not uncommon to see patches within the field and not widespread across the field at the initial stages. So it is best to keep sampling for these scales, and if you experience issues, there are ways to control. Again, historically, we have used oil applications to control for scales during the post-harvest timing or during the dormant stage in winter. We do have several insecticide options now as well, say Sivanto, Movento, Admire, Assail, or even organophosphates can effectively control those. And when you make spray applications for these particular pests, coverage is extremely important. As you mentioned, they feed inside protected spots under the bark, or they also feed at the lower side of the leaves. Once they are under the leaves or in the inside the bark somewhere in cracks and crevices, they are protected. We need to use higher spray volumes to make sure we get good coverage to bring the residues in contact with scales wherever they are. Again, historically, oil applications and other insecticides for scales have been made during the dormant time period. We compared application timings, and the same insecticides or oils performed better when applied during the post-harvest time. And the reason is that at that point, most of the bushes, they have active sap going on, they have active growth and movement of sap. Most of these insecticides work better because scales are getting the residues, picking up the residues more effectively at that point. Blueberry gallmage is another serious issue in the Southeast, and this is one pest that is extremely important, particularly in the southeastern United States. It is not as common issue in other blueberry producing regions. They are really small, tiny flies with long legs. The females lay eggs in the buds, and a question came up yesterday about the timing of the gallmage activity, and females lay eggs in the buds at stage 2. That is when the vulnerability of buds to gallmage starts. Whenever you're making applications, just keep that in mind to make sure you protect those stage 2 buds. So they are, of course, females lay eggs, and then larvae feed inside the buds and cause a lot of damage. They can cause up to 80% damage in blueberries. And midge injury, because of the timing, can be confused with the winter injury because it occurs at the same time when we get low temperatures in this area, and sometimes it can be confused. However, with the sampling, we can easily detect those and confirm presence of gallmage. Monitoring is, there are several ways to monitor those gallmages. Collecting small shoots with buds on them, put them in Ziploc bags. As soon as you put them in a very short period of time, larvae crawl out of the buds. You can get an idea of what kind of population levels you have. And you can also use those clear sticky traps. Yellow sticky traps can also be used. Inverted bucket traps can be used for adult monitoring. And however, these inverted traps and bucket traps are more work than they can produce in terms of than the benefit that they will lead to. With the most recent invention of the pheromones, you can also line these yellow or clear sticky traps, preferably yellow, traps with pheromones if available. I'm working with the company to see if they have any available in the U.S. I have not been able to confirm their availability commercially for use in the field yet, but we'll work with the manufacturers to see if that can be made possible. So relatively easy to sample and detect the populations. We also did some sampling in the field and found another way to set up as an early warning for gall midge sampling, where you put sticky cards out there and monitored general populations of midge and related species. And fungus gnat populations in every case, every site we had the traps at, they peaked about 2 weeks before gall midge. So that can be used as an early warning for gall midge infestations if you have a history of infestation in your field, to be prepared to make those applications when it comes to effective management. And that is extremely important. As you mentioned, insecticides are just protectants. They are not going to kill any larvae inside the buds. The goal is to protect the buds, have residues on the buds, so females cannot lay eggs in those buds. And when you have those traps, it's easy to identify gall midge from the fungus gnats. Look at those wing venation patterns. Gall midge has only one straight long vein, and the second one is a Y-shaped vein, whereas fungus gnats have a lot more veins in their wings. Really easy to identify with the hand lens as well. Management. So if flower buds, stage 2, as I mentioned, need to be protected, and diazinon is the most effective insecticide when it comes to gall midge. And luckily, we still have availability. Last year or so, we sort of ran into the risk of losing diazinon, but it is still available, at least at this point. And if you have used diazinon once and need to make another application, Delegate or Assail, Sivanto, Movento, even Apta, based on Florida trials, can be effective in controlling gall midge. Just as I mentioned earlier, insecticides are protectants. Make sure to apply insecticides at stage 2 birds to prevent females from laying eggs. Based on our trials, again, Delegate, diazinon, Movento were the most effective ones. Movento in particular provided much longer residual efficacy than other products in Premier blueberries in our trials. Flower thrips is another group of pests that can cause serious issues. Several species of flower thrips are present in southeastern U.S. They feed on leaves, on flower surfaces, different parts of the flowers. They are active before, during, and after the bloom. They can move into the blueberry fields from surrounding areas, either vaccinum species or other plants that may bloom before blueberries. We did some trials to see if we can see a temporal pattern on how they move into the field, but there was no real pattern. Once they are active and the blueberries are blooming, they immediately move and basically move across the field without any particular pattern. And between the southern highbush and rabbit eyes, we saw high populations in rabbit eyes as compared to southern highbush, and that may be just a matter of timing, because southern highbush is relatively early. Populations of thrips have not built up as much. During the rabbit eyes, high populations were observed. Monitoring for thrips is, just collect bloom, put in Ziploc bags. Basically thrips in the flowers will come out. If you have more than 2 thrips per cluster of 8 flowers, that is a sort of warning sign to start thinking about making application. If you don't, it may be too late. Diazinon, again, if it has not been used before. Otherwise, Entrust for organic, and Delegate, Assail, and Sivanto are your best options. We did some trials, and we saw that assail was most effective during the southern highbush time period, and assail and delegate both were effective during the rabbit eye time period. For longer blooms, 2 applications may be needed, because 1 application only lasted for up to a week, and 2 applications were good for the whole period. We also did another study to see if earlier applications during the fall may have any residues left for a good reason to control gall mage or thrips, or for any issues that they may cause for pollinators that we see during the bloom. We made applications starting in October every month in the new set of fields, as you see in this design, and then we took samples every month from those fields to see how the residues decline in those fields. We did not see longer residual activity of any of those products more than a month. As you can see, after 1 month, almost no residues were detected of any of those insecticides. Some of that may be the timing, because it was we started in October when the plants are already getting ready to slow down. But overall, we do not see any risk based on these results of in fall applications to pollinators that we need during the bloom. Chili thrips is another new issue, relatively new for us, maybe not so new for Florida, but they have been detected in 8 counties in Georgia. They are relatively small in size as compared to the flower thrips. They have incomplete dark stripes on their abdomen, and dark wings is the way to distinguish from the flower thrips. As I mentioned, 8 counties confirmed. They really like the new flush of growth. That's why they cause more damage during the post-harvest time when we do have new flush of fresh growth on the plants. And also on the mature tissues, they can feed and also cause damage, leading to curling and bronzing of the foliage. Trials were conducted in Florida. Of course, that's where the problem is at this point observed with these insecticides. And based on results of these trials, Apta and Assail were the most effective products to control chili thrips. So if you have problem, of course, in Florida, we have not seen damaging levels in Georgia yet. Once we see, we are actively in contact with farmers. If we do see issues, we'll definitely report out. So among all the list of pests that we experience in blueberries, SWD is still the key pest. It means we need to keep that in mind when we're making decisions about control of other pests. It's a widespread issue, we all know that, and females in particular have this ovipositor that they use to lay eggs in blueberries. Just reminders, they can very quickly build up populations because they can complete their development in 8 to 10 days and lead to, due to low tolerance in the market, can cause a lot of damage, leading to almost 100% crop loss because infested fruit can be rejected at the packing houses. In southeastern U.S., we can trap flies year-round, and the reason may be because we have something going on in the wooded areas. So, and with the monitoring, we used to use wet traps for monitoring, which are not very convenient to use. Over the years, we have worked to develop this, the dry traps. These are red sticky card-based traps baited with commercially available lures. They're really convenient to monitor for flies and highly recommended before the fruit starts to ripen to get an idea of whether you have flies or not. If you do detect even one fly, start making applications. If you have infested fruit, we have used salt extraction and sugar extraction methods, which are again wet and involve a lot of work. We recently developed another method in which you can put a pound of your berries in this vacuum chamber, put pressure about 98 kilopascals for 60 minutes. All of the larvae will come out of the berries. You can get an idea of the infestation levels that way without getting your hands wet. Management. We started with the biocontrol, of course. We did a survey to see what beneficial insects we have in our blueberry orchards in Georgia. We saw only 2 species at not so high levels, and the impact of these was 0, no impact on SWD. We then resorted to working with the introduced exotic parasitoids. One of those was approved for release in the field, and we have already started releasing in our Georgia blueberries farms. If you are a farmer and would like us to release these beneficial insects for SWD at your farm, please get in touch. We'll be glad to release at your farm too. Again, this is a slow process because releasing beneficials is a complicated process. We can only rear so many, but we will slowly continue this process until we get them established in the field. Chemical control, we have lots of options, as you can see here, especially for conventional management. And this means we have lots of opportunity to rotate between different modes of actions to minimize the risk of resistance development. These are the 4 recommended programs. These are just suggestions. Because we have lots of options, we can mix and match different insecticides to serve the purpose, depending on what market you're going to and what is the goal of the farm overall. When you have options, always start with the heaviest hammer, the most effective product that you have at hand, and then to knock the population down and maintain at the lower level with potentially reduced risk products to minimize non-target effects of those products on beneficials in the field. This list kind of gives you, again, colorful idea of different classes of insecticides we have, lots of those. One problem that we see here is low efficacy of any of the organic products. One thing we can do to improve efficacy of those or a benefit of those is making spray applications during the dawn and dusk times. That is when flies are active, and making applications during those times will help maximize the benefit of those spray applications. Behavioral controls products, a couple of those products are already out in the market. One of those products is Combi Protect. It can potentially, when you apply insecticides mixed with this product, you can even apply half rate and still get the same efficacy. This product was registered last year and will be available this year for use in the field. Last piece, cultural control. I'll just go through it very quickly. We have already shared these results, just reminders. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. Physical exclusion works at small scale, but it's a foolproof for SWD control in blueberries. Irrigation, if you have option. Drip irrigation is highly recommended for SWD in particular. Mulching, if you can use black weed mulch, that does help minimize populations and also kill any larvae that may be trying to pupate in the soil. Pruning, heavy pruning helps significantly with the flies that are looking for fruit. Flies don't like light, and pruning opens up the fruiting zone, and flies do not then like to spend as much time when the light is going to the fruiting zone within the canopy. Harvest as frequently as you can, and data have shown that harvesting every 3rd day was the best way to minimize SWD infestations in the fruit based on Michigan data. Sanitation, any culled fruit, because it serves as a attractant for flies, eliminate that whichever way you can by either packing in the clear plastic bags and putting in the sun, or burying them in the ground at least 2 feet to make sure nothing emerges out of those to serve as a source of inoculation again, infestation again. Post-harvest, if you have harvested and suspect it's infested fruit, you can store at lower temperatures at around 34, 35 degrees to make sure that, number one, it will slow the development to allow more time to market, or it will potentially kill smaller larvae within the berries as well. With that, I'll share this slide. This is part of the blueberry guide spray guide that we have developed, and 24 is already available, but 25 will be available in the next couple of weeks, as Jonathan shared. And you can take a look at this page and get an idea of what to do at what time. Again, the summary is that SWD is the key issue, and we need to keep that in mind while we are working with other pests. Lots of resources, Blueberry Guide, My IPM app, our Blueberry blog, and other resources are available. If you have any questions, let me know. And thank you so much. And sorry, I thought I had 30 minutes to go, right?
No, I think it got cut down to 20 minutes or something per talk, but no, it's okay. It's all right. You're fine. Thanks, Dr. Seal. Hey, here's a thank you gift. No problem. Yeah, we are running a little behind, but it's okay. If the session goes on a little longer, other sessions will continue, but we'll just carry on.
I've always had 30 minutes, right?
Hey, it's all right.
Again, if you have any questions,
There we go. And without further ado, to keep us moving, Dr. Mark Zaranata with a weed control update.
Yeah, so I'm Mark. I'm going to talk about a little bit about weeds and weed control and some herbicides that are out there that I see people aren't using, some weed problems I constantly run into, and some damage issues I see constantly. So with that, I'll get moving. So if you want to know about my history, I'm from Pennsylvania originally. This is my 23rd year here. I can't believe I've been here this long, but I'm still here. I have some crazy appointment now. I think that's right. And I cover all aspects of weed control and ornamentals, small fruits, Christmas trees. I do orchard floor management, and anyway, it keeps me quite busy. So anyway, I'm going to talk about difficult weeds, newer herbicides that are out there, application timings, and some damage issues, just to keep you trying to updated. One weed problem, I'm going to, like I said, the first problem we'll talk about are weeds. One big one I'm starting to see more and more of is tropical spiderwort. Running, and it's in quite a few fields. Quite an interesting plant. It's Comelina, so it'll be dayflower if you're familiar with that, but quite a different beast than the common dayflower that we see. It has these underground flowers that force self-pollination, as well as the little blue ones that you'll see on top, which can cross. And anyway, it's a perennial, and it likes to climb into plants, and limited herbicide activity. Thank God we got 2,4-D a couple years ago from Corteva back again, and we have a new one out called Hulk. Looks really good, and I'll show you some pictures of that later on. This is kind of what it looks like in the field. This is a little bit mowed down. It'll creep up into the plants. You'll see it growing on the banks and can be quite problematic. And that's a perennial and can be, I've seen it very big infestation problems with this. Smilax continues to be a problem. I constantly get questions about this plant. It's a perennial. It's actually a native. They call it Smilax greenbrier, catbrier. There's many species, but the two I see most are Smilax bonax and Smilax rotundifolia are the main ones that I see. Of course, this is perennial. It's male and female plants. Birds eat the fruit and, of course, land on the plant, deposit it, and it starts growing, grows quite well. There's limited selective herbicides available for this, 2,4-D and glyphosate, and also I have some trials out with Hulk this year, and it looks promising, but I don't know quite yet. This would be a grower's field. He had actually pulled out the Smilax out of the plant. Going too far here. Let me go back. Other way. Yeah, he had pulled it out of the plants, but you can see it's pretty much a monoculture of Smilax here to get rid of. So you actually could do post-directed applications of glyphosate there if you're careful, and it'll do a pretty good job, but you'll have to run it up to the highest rate that you could, which I'd tell you at least a quart per acre if you're using at least a 41% glyphosate. Dog fennel, it's a perennial problem, constantly see this. I still go to growers' fields, can't tell if they're growing dog fennel or blueberries. And this one we have several tools for this, but you'll see it growing in the plants. This will blow in. It's a perennial, but it'll blow in as a seed originally. A lot of guys try to cut it to the base. It'll come right back. Spreads by air movement. It's like a dandelion or an aster seed, blows around, hits the plant, falls right down in the middle of the plant usually, and this is what you'll see. We have a good arsenal of herbicides, 2,4-D, glyphosate, Quinstar, and Hulk also looks very good on this. Anyway, I commonly see fields like this, particularly young fields. If you get a blueberry plant growing in the middle of that, it's going to kill that plant. And there's several herbicides. There's another one out, Stinger, that we don't have in our state that some people have as a Section 24C, but I doubt growers would use it here because it's so expensive. But anyway, that would be one you could spray on and really be sloppy on the plant. You get some damage on your blueberry plant, but it'll kill that dog fennel, so it can be very difficult to deal with. Another one, always get questions on this quite often. Blueberries grow in real swampy areas, and this is red root, and they call it red root obviously because of the red roots on it. Has flowers that are kind of look like irises a little bit to me. It's a very strange plant family, but it's very closely allied to the Iridaceae family. So, but it's Lacanthes, and it's perennial, but seed or root pieces can move it around in the fields. It's a great pollinator. Insects love this, produces all kind of nectar. Limited selective herbicides, but mesotrione seems to work real well on that. That would be Callisto, if you're familiar with that. Turns things white, and it's pretty good at this, at controlling this. Of course, glyphosate and Hulk also looks pretty good on this. So I just have to wait and see what the results look like. I'd like to test things for 2 years till I get a good handle on it. This would be a polluted field. I see this tends to be real patchy in the fields, but if you get it, it gets really bad and can be really difficult to get rid of. And it's particularly bad in younger fields too. And this will compete very well with younger plants and kill them if it's not controlled. Alligator weeds, another one. I still see this quite a bit in fields. And if I see patches of, if you get alligator weed real bad, again, you can't tell if you're growing alligator weed or blueberries. It's also in the, let me see, it's a perennial and grows some seed or root pieces, limited selective herbicides. This is very tolerant to glyphosate. I was using 4 quart rates of glyphosate just to see if I could kill it, even though that would be far too high in a blueberry field. It doesn't control it well at all. And Hulk also looks good on this, and 2,4-D actually would beat this back quite a bit. And this is one that's, like I said, pretty resistant to glyphosate, and it's in the amaranth family, and that's one reason, if you know pigweed and cotton fields and corn and soybeans, that's why. And you can see, the type of situations I often run into. Okay, last one that I wanted to talk about as far as weeds or blackberry. Of course, some people grow this as a crop. Birds eat the fruit. They come land on the blueberry plants, of course, deposit the seeds, and then you get blackberries growing everywhere. And it's very difficult to remove the blackberry out of a blueberry field. And I've seen fields that are just polluted with this. Of course, it's perennial, but you get it from seed or root pieces. Limited selective herbicides. Glyphosate works fairly well if you can get it on it. Hulk, I don't know. I tried doing a couple applications late this season. I don't know how the control will be. And also I tried Hulk in actually some blackberry fields. Will be very interesting to see how this product works. And you can see this is where it's been mowed off at least or pulled out. But again, this really pollutes blueberry fields. I don't know how many of you have problems with this, but it's quite problematic. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a few of the herbicides that are out there that people just aren't using enough of that work really well. Of course, surfland's gone. I doubt it's ever coming back is all I could tell you. Maybe we'll get lucky, but it was a great product for young blueberry plants. Any young fruit, tree, berry, bushberry, ornamental. It was a fabulous herbicide. Worked real well controlling weeds. It's very safe. It's not the best at controlling weeds, but the thing it brings to the table is safety. And I hated to see it go, but it's too costly to manufacture. And when they manufacture it, it's very close to TNT, so it's not a matter of when the plant's going to start on fire and blow up. It's not if, it's just when. So a lot of companies don't like dealing with it. Product to replace that was Dual Magnum. Finally got a Section 24C on this last year. We got 16 to 21 ounces. It's good to control annual weeds. Here's the waiver you're supposed to go to and click the button saying I'm not going to sue Syngenta, and then it's a Group 15 herbicide. It really needs a tank mix partner of simazine and trellis, either 1 or 2 quarts of simazine and 1 pound of trellis, and it's labeled in blackberry and blueberry. And then, of course, the 24C it is, so I have to reapply for this in 2029. I have to late 2028, so we can get it in 2029. Break on, not know if you're familiar with this one. This is a new one. This was the one familiar with the aquatic herbicides. It was Sonar. We finally got it in some terrestrial formulations, and it's labeled in citrus, stone fruit, and citrus, stone fruit, palm fruit, and coffee, I think, are the 4 labels that it has now. Hopefully we'll get we got blueberries, so pretty much anything. I'm sorry, I'm confusing this with another product, but anyway, pretty much it's labeled on any fruit now or nut tree that's out there, and then you use it at 21 to 43 ounces, and let me see, it's good on many broadleaf weeds, and it's sold as break on for my world. If you're in cotton, it's sold as break. So if you ever wonder, it's the same thing in a different bottle. But if you're growing blueberries or pecans or something else, you're supposed to use break on. It's PHI is 30 days, RER, reentry intervals 48 hours. It's a Group 12 herbicide, so it's really different. It's good rotational product. Not many plants are resistant to, or I'm not aware there's any documented resistance, but I'm sure it's pigweed's already resistant to it. So the minute you use a herbicide and it's developed in cotton or soybeans, pigweed will be resistant to it. I still have, in the field trials I've had, I see no damage on the plants, and I have more studies planned with this with some tank mix partners, different rates. I'd like to see how it does. Prettiest herbicide I ever worked with, beautiful turquoise, in case you ever noticed. When I poured it out of the bottle, usually you get these stinky, nasty herbicides that are some disgusting brown. Surfland was kind of pretty orange, but this one is a nice turquoise, just so you know. Zeus or Zeus Prime, you should be familiar with this product, particularly if you have nutsedge problems. It's just a fabulous product. It's like Chateau, but it controls nutsedge really well. Yellow nutsedge, it doesn't really control purple at all. 6 to 12 ounces. Zeus Prime, it actually has a hit of sulfentrazone in it, and then chlorfentrazone in it, so the rates range is a little bit different. You can go 7 to about 15 ounces. Like I said, excellent control of many broadleaf and grass weeds from seed. It's a PPO inhibitor, so it's the same thing as Chateau, but it controls nutsedges fairly well. And I've been working with this product since 1992. So I have sulfentrazone, which is Zeus, I know very well and can use it in a lot of different crops for lots of different things. And the big thing to remember is the good nutsedge control. Allion, by far the best pre-emergent herbicide with the most longevity I've ever worked with in my life. I keep telling people stories that when I first worked with it, we were about 16 weeks, and this is in containers and ornamentals. We were getting no weed growth after continually reseeding the pots with weed seed, and I just couldn't believe it, and I had to call some of my colleagues, and yeah, that's what we're getting. But you can get 14 to 16 weeks of control out of this, which is fabulous here in the Southeast, and it's a really great rotational product. I hate people to use products over and over again, but this is a fabulous rotational product to use in your systems during the year. I was going to tell you now, if you have yellow nuts, if you have any sedges or perennial grasses, this product is not going to work well because, pre-emergent herbicides you put down as a prophylactic barrier. So if you get anything to bust that barrier, any type of weeds emerging, driving over with a tractor, busting that surface off, you're going to lose your weed control. And it's just like that. So if you have nut sedges or grasses coming through invading that pre-emergent herbicide area where you put it, it's not going to work well. It's going to fall apart on you. Embed Extra, this is 2,4-D. It's a choline formulation, which is less volatile. The great thing about it is 2,4-D never really fell off a lot of the crops that we have. The problem was we couldn't find any products that actually were marketing or actually had it on the label. It used to be Weed R64 that's gotten sold many, many times, and they keep dropping all kind of crops off of it because of liability. So we really didn't have it for blueberries, blackberries, strawberries. This Cortiva came back with a Med Extra, and now we have it. So it's just the old 2,4-D. It's just a different formulation, which makes it less volatile. So anyway, it's up to a 3 pint. You can, let me see, use 3 pints or it's 1.4 pounds of active per year. It's excellent post-control of lots of difficult broadleaf weeds. And of course, it's 30-day PHI, 48-hour REI. It's a growth regulator herbicide, a group 4, but it's poor on nuts edges. Okay, Quinstar is quinclorac. Use it 12 to 24 ounces. Excellent at lots of post control of many difficult broadleaf weeds. Crabgrass and torpedo grass fit in there. It's real strange. It controls some perennial grasses and some annual grasses really well, and it has pre-emergent activity as well, so it's a great use product. It's a group 4, a different group 4. They divide the group 4 herbicides under several subcategories, and it's in one of these. Again, poor on the yellow nut sedge or any type of sedges. Okay, Hulk is the one I wanted to talk about here fairly quickly. Anyway, brand new herbicide from Cortiva. This is the one that got labeled on palm fruit, stone fruit, nuts, and citrus. That's what it's got labeled on. And hopefully blueberries is coming. So it's a group 4. It's a very different group 4 herbicide. It's kind of like triclopyr, and so it's kind of strange, but it's working pretty well. I'm seeing pretty good crop safety in my initial trials. And I just need more research to find out how it's going to work and what it does. But it's a real tongue twister to say, but it's fluorpyro, I can't even say it, fluorpyruhexafen. It's real strange pronunciation. But anyway, this was just some preliminary trials. This was actually with, let me go back. Where'd it go? Oh. Nope, other way. This was actually with tropical spiderwort. I was real happy to see that. Had excellent control of that field. It cleaned it up really well. Didn't see any damage. This was just this year. I want to go back and monitor those plants because a lot of these growth regulator herbicides takes about 6 months for the actual blueberry plants to show damage, so I'd like to see that. The other thing that worries about me with growth regulator herbicides is accumulation. That's a big problem where it accumulates in the plant. You might not see damage right away, but when you get the levels high enough in the plant, it'll start manifesting damage that you don't like. And sometimes by the time you see that damage, it's too late, and you're probably going to not get much productivity out of those plants. Some of the herbicide rotations, just so you know, something like dual magnum you would use, and then do like Chateau, but this will be up to 4 years after planting. So these are young blueberry fields you'd work with, but just a couple things just so you'd like to know. But I would do something like Dual and Chateau. Most of the growers here use 2 applications. I think as we move forward, we might change that ideology and maybe put 3 pre-emergent herbicide applications because we have so much winter weed pressure. But your second year might be Dual Magnum and Chateau again. That's fine to do that. And then you could go for like Chateau and Solacam your third year. Once the plants are 18 inches or over, 24, even about 18 to 24 inches, I'm very comfortable with most herbicides. But a lot of these herbicides you can't use on plants. They have to be in the ground at least 2 years. And then another one would be Dual and Chateau, Chateau and Allion and Carmex would be something you might think about. But anyway, and if you're looking for a cost breakdown, Dual is about $50 per. This would be per 1 treated acre where you're doing banded applications. So for 1 treated acre, you're going to get about 3 banded acres because you're only treating about 1/3 of the acre when you're treating the actual planting row. So anyway, but you're looking at about, you can see how cheap some of these are, but Dual and Simazine, you're looking about cost per banded acre is about $20. Chateau's about $25. Solacam's about $30. Carmex or any dye-on formulations about $4. It's really cheap product. Dual and Trellis. Trellis is one that I talk about still. Great product. It's the same thing as Gallery for ornamentals, if you're familiar. That product is super safe, great tank mix partner. It controls a lot of weeds that Dual does not hit, but it works really well. And then you got Allion, which is about $25. Let me see. And as I mentioned before, with the winter weed pressure, I think you think about applications in October, November. January, February, and June and July. It might be sometimes you might think, particularly if you have overhead irrigation, and you can put a pre-herbicide down anytime you want. Anyway, and I get a lot of people asking me about label rates. A lot of people like to use really low rates of the herbicide. I don't recommend that. I usually tell people to use a higher rate towards the top end. I think you get much better control and much better bang for your buck. And with fuel costs, that I think you could justify that pretty easily. Glyphosate. Still see lots and lots of glyphosate damage in growers' fields. A lot of people still like using glyphosate, and I tell people you can't use it like crack. You can't put it down every time you do a cleanup application. You need to do a cleanup application with a lot of annual weeds. You really need to be using glufosinate or some formulation like Cheetah or Rely. But you can't spray it like I said, every post-emergent cleanup. It's great for cleaning. It's a great herbicide for cleanup. I wouldn't recommend it more than once a year or every other year. It's phloem loaded and can be root absorbed in sandy soils. Glyphosate accumulates in the plant. So it can have it in the plant. You might not see any damage, but once you get the rates high enough, you're going to start seeing some damage that I'll show you. And roots can absorb loose glyphosate. If you have real sandy soils, it'll dock to the soil particles. But once those docking sites run out, it gets loose in the free water that's available to the plants, and it'll suck it right up. And then you need to use this herbicide wisely. This type of damage you're always going to see, this mouse-eared stunting, and this is just about any plant. You'll start seeing this, and usually the culprit is glyphosate. I can't tell you in ornamentals, just about every field I work in. And then if you get a close-up, you get this mouse-eared. Plant like this, darn it. I'm almost done here. Plant like this, I doubt that's going to come out in any reasonable amount of time. It's going to take 2-3 years, if that. Dicamba, it came off the market this past year in 2024. It might be back in 2026, and it's labeled in cotton and soybeans is my problem in genetically modified crops. You can apply up to 2 pounds per acre. It has a KOC of 2, which means it's leaching, its interaction with soil organic particles has a really high leachability. And the half-life can be 3 weeks to 9 months. And I just worry about it in collection ponds in a lot of places in South Georgia. You start getting it high enough, you're going to start having problems with it. If you look at just a Google map of Alma, you see all these little white patches. That's where they grow cotton. They rotate cotton and peanuts. And then right next door, you got a nice big lake, and then you got blueberry fields all over, all this residue running down into the fields, and unfortunately nobody's doing any testing, which really bothers me, because I think over time that could be an issue. So I have to monitor whether or not dicamba is going to come back or not. And it's very, very detrimental to plant material. This is just dicamba damage on trees, which I often see in gated communities because they over-apply it. They'll put down a 3-way mix containing dicamba. About 2 years later, the oak trees or any tree starts dying, and they wonder why. And I can tell you that's dicamba. And then same with blueberries. I've done work with it where that's one application of 1 pound of dicamba in the fall, and that's what it looked like in the spring, and that plant ain't coming back. Typical twisting, it's a growth regulator. But anyway, future research of what I'm planning on doing this year and on, it changes all the time, but evaluation of hawk for weed control and safety. I want to compare some application rates of herbicides and timing to try to get an idea. I'm going to start doing some applications in late November, sometime in October, November, see if how long they can last for. I'd like to know. I'd like to do dicamba testing with some of the labs more than I've done. I've been sending spike samples into the lab in really dirty water, and they miss it every time. So that's really scary that they're sending water samples in and the labs are missing it. But that water is still hot, meaning that if I took that contaminated water and watered blueberry plants growing in containers, they're going to get damaged in about a month if I used, let's say, 100 mils of a 500 part per billion dicamba contaminated water. I did a cup of that 3 times a week. In 4 weeks, you're going to start flashing damage into blueberries, and that doesn't make me very comfortable at all. I have some work planned with Zolfino with living mulches, so we're going to do that. So I have plenty to keep me busy, and that's it. If you have any questions, I'll take them, and I don't know. Yeah, Home Plate is an organic herbicide. It's just a burn down type product. I think it's just a fatty acid product, but it'd be similar to glufosinate, something like that, but it's labeled for organic use. It's OMRI registered. So no residual, it won't move around, just burns it down. So if it's a perennial type plant, you'd have to do multiple applications to control it. Anything else? That's it?
All right, thanks, Dr. Zaranata. Here's a appreciation gift for you.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it, thanks.
Yeah.
That it?
There we go. All right, so y'all have heard the spiel 100 times by now, so I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Delfina Rubio Amez.
Thank you, Jacob. Hello, everyone. My name is Delfina Rubio, and I'm an assistant professor and small fluid extension specialist at the University of Georgia, based in Tifton. This is the year number 4 that I presented in this meeting. So today I'm going to give you some horticultural update. 3 years of research. It was hard to put 3 years of research in a 20-minute presentation, but I'll do my best to give you an update on what my research program is doing, what the research projects that had finished, and which ones are the new ones that we're still working on them. So when I started the position, a lot of our fertilization management practices were outdated. Not much research was performed on the new varieties that are currently planted in Georgia, which are Farding, a release from the University of Florida, and Brightwell is still one of our most planted rabbitite cultivar. And so the first thing that I did is start doing some research on fertilization and some sap analysis, and then looking also at calcium and boron and how that affects fruit quality. So today I'm going to talk to you mainly about phosphorus and potassium and sap analysis. And then we also start doing some work with ethaphone, trying to see if the application of ethaphone could help producers delay bloom on the new southern high bush cultivars, especially Georgia Dawn and Farding. And I'm going to move on to some other projects that we're also working on pruning techniques. And the main question there is pruning actually reduces yield. Also photoselective devices, and I'll show you a picture and some results on that, and humic systems. So first of all, as you know, and if you're a blueberry grower, you probably know the pH is very important. And the plant usually grows in a pH of 4.5 to 5.5. And within that range of pHs, depth of pH, you have some nutrients that are more available than others. And so as we go more into the acidic pH, we start losing the availability of some of the nutrients. So it's very important to manage pH and to have always in mind that some nutrients will be less available than others depending on the pH of the soil. Also, if we looked at our sufficient levels, those were, as I said, they were established in 1999 on varieties that are no longer planted in Georgia. So we start looking at, are the varieties that are planted now, as Farding and Georgia Dawn and Kikris, are responding or having the same sufficient levels, or what is the nutrient mobility on the nutrients, how the nutrients change during the season. So our recommendation, this is a recommendation from the University of Georgia Extension Service. And once again, this was established based on older varieties, and when, probably 50 or 40 years ago when the industry was established. However, it's very important to note that especially, the nutrients have are uptake in a different way by the plant. So we have to always keep in mind that we're looking at a system, at a production system in which, there are inputs and outputs, that we also need to think about, what is already on the soil before we establish our fertilization management practices. We need to constantly keep taking leaf samples to see what the plant nutrient status is, and understand how the plant takes all of these nutrients, the nutrient mobility. And I like to always remind growers that we're dealing with a perennial plant, so there are a lot of nutrient mobility in the plant, and there's several nutrients, or most of the nutrients get stored in the ground and in the canes, and they remobilize when the plants break dormancy. So all of this needs to be considered when we decide to establish our fertilization management practices for, after harvest or for the next season. So once again, I said I'm going to talk about phosphorus and potassium, and for these two nutrients, phosphorus, for example, it's mobile in the plant, but has very low mobility in the soil. And if you attended the talk yesterday, my student did a great presentation talking about how phosphorus gets trapped in the soil, and sometimes it is not available for the plant to uptake because it has very low mobility in the soil. Potassium, on the other case, it's very mobile in the plant, but it has low to medium mobility in the soil. So, as I said, it's very important to think about the blueberry production system as, as a system with inputs and outputs. And one of the main outputs of the system is the fruit that we harvest every year. We're dealing with a perennial system. We're removing this fruit every year, and how much nutrient is going every time we harvest the fruit. So when I did some analysis on the nutrient content of the fruit, we had this great result that we are actually removing very low phosphorus of the system, but a lot of potassium. So that, will make us think, okay, if we are not removing as much phosphorus as we think our current fertilization practices on phosphorus and potassium, enough for what the plant needs, or for what are we removing. So with that in mind, we set up several experimental locations. We set up experimental sites in 4 commercial farms, with different fertilization rates for phosphorus and also for potassium. So the phosphorus and potassium results that I'm going to show you today come from these 4 farms. And they all have, as you can see, different fertilization management practices. We go from 33 to as low as 15 grams per plant per year. So, and there also we have different varieties here. We have Farding in 2 of the farms, and then we have Vernon and Premier on the other 2, so Southern Highbush and Rabbit Eye farms. Those farms also have different soil, as you can see there. And that is very important because sometimes we think, okay, we do have sandy soils, which is very common in South Georgia. But the fact that we have sandy, fine sand, loamy fine sand, it will have a different nutrient, the soil will interact very different with the fertilizers, just because we have different characteristics and different textures there. So all of those farms that we sampled were located in South Georgia. And we sample leaves from May to July in a 2-week interval, and we also collected soil, and we send this for analysis. So now I'm going to show you the results of 2 years' worth of data, looking at tracking nutrients in the plant and in the soil. And I'm going to only show you results on Southern Highbush, just because I want you to see the differences between these 2 management practices. So one of the farms, if you can remember, had one of the highest amount of phosphorus fertilizer applied, and it's this farm right here. That farm fertilized with fertigation and also granular fertilization, okay? And the other farm right here only had granular fertilization applied. So this green bar that you see here across, it's the minimum recommended by the University of Georgia in what the phosphorus content of the soil needs to be. And then you have here all the months, 2022, April, and then 2023, this is the 2nd year. And then we have the minimum concentration of phosphorus in leaf tissue, which is the red line on the top. And the yellow arrows right here, it's when we were supposed to sample to see how we need to adjust the fertilization practices for the next year, okay? So, as you can see here, that, and then here, this line, this dotted line right here, it's that the phosphorus concentration in the soil in this specific farm in 2022 and 2023. So as you can see, this farm that apply high amounts of fertilizer, you can see how the soil does not, it's just, sometimes goes below what is recommended for phosphorus concentration in the soil. But if you can see, the bars right here are the phosphorus concentration in the leaves all across 2022, and then here all across 2023. So we can see that phosphorus concentration in the leaf was below the minimum recommended, and that happened in the two farms, as you can see right here. All the bars are, sometimes we can find that it's a little bit just above the minimum recommended phosphorus concentration in the leaves. So even though we had different type of fertilization practices, and one farm applied more than the other, we still see that southern high bush, and this is farthing, it's always below the minimum recommended. So that makes us wonder that maybe we could reduce our sufficient level. We can lower our sufficient level for phosphorus, and maybe that way we can reduce fertilizer costs and for blueberry production. The other thing that we saw is that, this farm had also high amount of phosphorus application, and most of the phosphorus just stayed on the top of the soil. So these are the two depths that we sample, and these can also be causing, leaching and losing of fertilizers to groundwater. And when we put all of the samples together, we can see how the leaf phosphorus concentration was higher when we were below the recommended level in the soil. And when we had high phosphorus concentration in the soil, we had low leaves concentration, low phosphorus in the leaves. So one other thing that we're looking into is that Erichor mycorrhiza. Blueberries are, have Erichor mycorrhiza naturally, or they interact with these mycorrhizas to uptake nutrients and help them uptake nutrients because blueberries had evolved in a very low input, soils with very minimal access of phosphorus and calcium. So as you can see there, we quantify that mycorrhiza colonization in each of those farms. And this is the farm that was applying more fertilizer, and we had less mycorrhizal colonization on these plants. So usually, Erichor mycorrhizas and mycorrhizas in general have low quantities of colonization when more fertilizer is applied. So now moving on to phosphorus. To potassium. Potassium is a very important nutrient for the plant, and it maintains leaves relative water content in the plant. It influences freeze tolerance as well, and plants absorb potassium from the soil solution through calcium channels, and that are located in the plasma membrane. So this is a very important nutrient to consider during our fertilization. And as you can see here, once again, we have different rates of potassium that are being applied on the same farms. And what we saw here is that what I want you to take home is that we saw an increase of phosphorus on the colder months. And this was observed on southern high bush, and it was observed on rabbit eye. So when the temperature was low, we saw temperature was start to reduce. We saw an increase in potassium in the leaf of the southern high bush, and also on rabbit eye. So when we put all of the data together, we looked at how this is when the temperature was higher, and this is when it was colder temperature. We saw an increase in leaf nutrient content and leaf potassium content as the temperature decrease. So our conclusion is that soil phosphorus did not match leaf phosphorus content. In fact, when we increase that phosphorus in the soil, it could sometimes reduce that uptake. As was mentioned yesterday, phosphorus sometimes gets trapped in the sandy particles of the soil. Higher doses of fertilizers definitely does not guarantee higher production or higher yield. And increasing doses of potassium are not translated into higher potassium in the leaves. And definitely when potassium, it's very affected by seasonality and temperature. So with that, if you guys have any questions. One other thing that I would like to mention is that when we looked at all the results from all the 4 farms, we saw more stability in nutrient concentration in the leaves after July, early August. So we're thinking that it might be best to sample leaf tissue to adjust fertilization management practices in August, just so we can, adjust, because that's when we saw less variability on all our results. With that, if you guys have any questions.
Anyone got any questions?
Phosphorus, question,
Mm-hmm.
cannot leach through the soil into the soil.
It is, but if we increase phosphorus, if we keep applying that phosphorus, some of them will start leaching into the water. And also, it decreases mycorrhiza colonization in the plant.
All right.
You're the expert on phosphorus in the state of Georgia.
I think we have a lot of data on looking at phosphorus in blueberries, especially in Fardin and rabbit eyes. So, and then as you saw, that southern highbush has very low phosphorus concentration in the leaves, and so we might be able to reduce the sufficient level, which will reduce your fertilization, probably that you use a phosphorus fertilizer. And this is also, very important because in Oregon, they reduce blueberry production, they reduced the sufficient levels of phosphorus 3 years ago. So not because we put more phosphorus, that means that the plant is going to uptake it. And we're actually making the plant lose that mycorrhiza, reduce mycorrhiza colonization that helps into with the uptake of phosphorus and with the uptake of other nutrients as well.
Can you tell me what stimulated you to get focused on phosphorus?
Well, one of the main things is because fertilizer prices are increasing. So what we need to look into how we can have less input and spend less money into producing blueberries. And then the other reason is that, when the industry started, we had a very different industry. People were not talking about being sustainable or soil health or soil quality. And that is going to be, now it's different. Now people are, talking about how we can preserve soil, how we can increase the soil quality, how can we reduce water pollution. So there are several areas that blueberry production, but not only blueberry production, the agricultural production in general is being, forced to move to a different direction and trying to be more sustainable because that is just, the climate at the moment.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Dr. Rubio Mez, and thank you, everyone, for paying attention to the AM Blueberry session. That concludes our session for the day. And I'd like to thank all our speakers once again and thank all our sponsors, and y'all enjoy the rest of your day.